Record this session. So we are going to be discussing, if I'm not mistaken, myth number 6, which is if English should become the official language of the United States. But before we engage in a debate about this highly controversial topic, I would like to go over the general comments on your essay number 2 first, and then I do have some revision suggestions for those of you who could benefit from the revision. Anyone can actually benefit from revision, but some of you probably more than the others. So I would say on a positive note, most of you have grasped the core of the assignment. Some of you addressed the most significant aspects of the prompt, and some have offered the core of a convincing argument against the myth that you had picked. And fortunately, you had a few to select from. Some problematic areas that could be the fertile ground for reorientation and revision would be the following questions. Have you identified and defined the myth and the terms dealing with rhetorical situation and the arguments? Have you summarized the source text following the summary guidelines? Have you defined the rhetorical situation of the text in terms of occasion and the context that has made the text conceivable? And this may involve going beyond the text to study the background of the text and the occasion that necessitated the text. How do you establish basically your authority or your ethos? Have you used specific excerpts from the academic text to show this? Do you offer convincing argument to prove that you have done so? And what is the overall frame and the authority that you cite or you stress? It is important to remind oneself of the purpose in writing the text, how you convey your point of view to persuade your readers as represented not only in the self-representation, any kind of self-representation, as a matter of fact, is also other representation. Who is the audience, intended, actual, potential, or unintended, specifically and generally, and which audience do you concur with? What emotional, pathos, ethical, moral, and logical logos, or facts, if you will, do you use to substantiate your claim and appeal to your audience? Examples, definitely in the second essay, we could see more examples that you would draw on to present and represent basically your claim. It is important also to be sensitive to the genre of the text. I would say that in the second essay, you were more sensitive in meeting the features of this particular genre, which is really evaluation and critiquing claims. What is your persona? How is it revealed in the style of the writing and the type of the register and the style of the text? Have you as a writer successfully communicated your intended meaning to convince your readers about the work? And obviously, all the work that you do in this class, particularly the remaining essays, would be source-driven and source-based. Have you used the relevant sources, and have you cited your sources accurately and sufficiently. More specifically, integration of quotations and paraphrases according to APA conventions. Have you checked your use of primary and secondary sources with respect to citation practices? And have you paid attention to in-text citations and APA conventions? And this is not always clear cut, particularly if you use basically a packet, a course packet. Things can become more complicated when it comes to citation. Have you applied APA conventions in your works cited page? I had some ideas about the abstract, which I would not go over at this point. I'd rather go over the revision process in the interest of time. So, do you see my screen?
Yeah.
SA2 revision?
Yes.
So I would say the revision process actually begins once you finish your work. You have reread your essay probably several times, hopefully. I have given you some advice, individual. I'm going over the general comments. I just did actually. You may have received suggestions from your peer reviewers about your work and quality and revision. One fundamental question basically to ask yourself would be, what problems or challenges did you face in writing this essay? And if you were able to overcome those challenges. So the general revision would begin with the kinds of questions that I just gave you, questions dealing with the main argument, your reasons, the support for the reasons, predicting and confronting objections and counter arguments. Or they could deal with the process of revising specific parts, not just the general revision process. As I have indicated here, these would deal with basically the genre, features and the criteria, the stance, the analysis, the evaluation of the argument, your thesis, the type of reasoning that you have used, the type of evidence and support that you offer. So I would say you want to reread your draft. You want to put it aside for a day or two, and you want to think about your purpose and audience. A scratch kind of an outline would be always useful. Not in the beginning, actually, after you finish an essay, to see if there is continuity, consistency in terms of basically unfolding ideas in terms of the general context, summarizing functions of your essay. So it definitely is a very helpful process to the revision. And you could plan redrafting or revising your work. I suggest that you use track changes. If you are not familiar with track changes, we could definitely spend some time. It is a powerful word way of revising lexical, I would say at sentence, at paragraph, or extended discourse level. You want to reread for the basic features, you want to ensure that you have a coherent and clear organization, and you want to review the comments, both the individual and the collective ones. You want to Identify and highlight summaries, paraphrases, and quotations. This is significant when it comes to working with sources. You want to make sure that you apply summary guidelines that I have provided in the critical reading resources on Beachboard. You want to make sure that you have used really expert sources. And that is how you establish your own ethos as well, that those sources are relevant, that you definitely evaluate the sources that you find to be relevant, and you use the grammar of citation to integrate the sources as smoothly and as effectively as possible. Some additional basically resources you could use. And this is very important that you use what is called reporting verbs. We have a tendency to use say, and the English language is much richer than that in terms of reporting verbs. Like any other languages you find in the world, English could use basically to report impartial or objective views. So say or says, the author says or points out or mentions, these would be neutral. But there are reporting verbs that we use in the context of this course that deal with evaluation, such as proposes, suggests, refutes, challenges. You know, these reporting verbs definitely are more evaluative in nature, and we have to use the kind of reporting verb that reflects the general, basically, mood and mode of the discourse, if you will. And we also have some reporting verbs, basically, which simply say what the citing source or the cited source are doing. For instance, you could say that Bauer begins by doing this and concludes by saying this. This is neither basically factual nor evaluative. It really just shows what the cited source, for instance, is doing. Not only that, it also shows what the cited basically source has done in the original text. So this is a link. It provides you with a list of these reporting verbs and the grammar involved in using reporting verbs in direct and also in indirect speech. This was a potential area of development because we seem to be content with a limited number of reporting verbs, and sometimes we really lose sight of the fact that we should use different reporting verbs for different contexts. Not only that, definitely by marking your reporting verbs, you detach yourself from the source, or you express alliance at the same time, and yet you don't claim those ideas to be yours. There's always the danger of plagiarism. Using the proper reporting verbs would indicate that. And obviously, if you use direct quotations, you have to use quotation marks and provide the page number. In APA, you simply write P, not PGE, or the abbreviation P period or whatever the page number is, or PP. When it comes to direct quotations, which is preceded, depending on the context, by the author's last name and, of course, the date of the publication, if it has not been mentioned in the source, the text. So by reviewing these things, then you would go over the implementation of your revision. You would introduce and review the changes you have made and track changes. You will do additional research. Sometimes if you need more information to develop your essay, some areas may be underdeveloped. If you have difficulty finding a structure for your essay, you could just look for models of and models for. Definitely you could be more creative and critical in using such models, but definitely for some of you would be helpful. And while you're doing this, keep in mind that it is important to keep the features of this particular text or genre in mind, that it has to be well focused and you have to have a well stated thesis. It has to be appropriately critiqued without an extreme or too strong or indecisive stance, or I strongly, for instance, agree or disagree. I would say, that is not really framing it academically. Or if you do not take a position, or if you take an in-between position, I would call that an indecisive stance. Definitely, the text should be well developed with relevant details and examples. Sometimes you have to look for more convincing examples if lacking, or if there are gaps. The support may be persuasive. If not, your evidence may not be clear and convincing enough. The reasons may be relevant or well substantiated. If not, you have to revisit basically your whole argument structure. And definitely your essay should be well balanced in terms of integrating rebuttals and counter arguments. If not, imagine how those with opposing views may disagree with or diverge from your point of view. The challenge is really to convince those who have a different view rather than those who share your views. So you could look at the organization, look at your beginning, look at the main body of your essay, and look at the ending. If your beginning is not catchy, if it is weak, add a forecasting statement, go from general to specific, or you could restructure your beginning. When it comes to the main body, if there are lapses or leaps or gaps, you want to think of adding connectives and transitions to show the progression of your argument. And when it comes to the ending, if you don't end in a memorable and effective way, it is important that you reassert your position rather than repeating verbatim what you had said. You want to still your text to resonate with the same theme, with the same argument, but definitely you want to end it in a more efficacious, a more effective way, rather than simply reasserting your thesis. Obviously, it is important to pay attention to language as well. You want to proofread and edit for recurrent errors in grammar, punctuation, mechanics, spelling. If you use grammar check and spelling check, you have to be very careful. Actually, you have to be very competent and knowledgeable to be able to use those programs judiciously and academically. Otherwise, you could fall into the trap of what some of you would consider to be irregularities when it comes to English grammar and spelling. That's why I suggest you want to print a copy to do your proofreading and editing before you finalize it. You want to identify your recurrent errors. You want to think about your word choices when you are not under pressure. Word forms, you want to think about your sentence structures, variety, and different ways of shortening or combining related, basically, sentences to add more texture and variety to your essay, stylistically speaking. Any questions?
No.
Okay, so let me ask Max to take over to organize the debate.
So for today's debate, we're talking about whether English should be the official language of the U.S. I had one pro and about 20 cons and one judge. So are we going to go into breakout rooms and discuss this, or are we just?
Yeah, definitely, it's a good idea.
Okay.
Let me form the groups, and then we will come back to the main floor. So I suppose we are all back in the main room and ready to go to the debate directly. Max, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Okay.
Good. So I do have one judge listed, Nathan, but he was in my breakout room, but he's not in the meeting anymore for some reason. He may have gotten kicked out or something else. So I don't know what happened with Nathan.
We have to go to the Supreme Court then.
Yeah, I suppose so. Sure. So we have one person arguing pro on whether the U.S. should be an official language. That is Oscar. So, Oscar, would you like to lay out your argument?
Sure, I'll start. So basically, I just wanted to kind of make a few arguments here because I know I'm the only one, so I'll probably be talking for a while because I do want to go over some things. And first, I kind of want to point out that I think whenever students think of this, they typically think of a straw man argument because when they hear the word official language, I think they kind of get afraid of that terminology because then they'll start to think, well, nobody's going to be able to speak anything other than English now, but that's really not the case at all because during the Obama administration, I believe it was 2014, there was an act that was proposed by Congress, I believe, and it was very similar to this, but the act actually prohibited any discrimination based upon non-English languages. It was only for federal reasons. They could not actually allow people to speak English, or they can't force people to speak English within private businesses or in homes or within one another. That is purely for federal reasons. And one thing I kind of did want to point out was, well, I think typically when people think of a country, they want to think of nationalism. So I think by having only one language primarily, or at least a symbol of a language that represents this country, people want to be unified, because typically when people speak other languages, they are discriminated against or they are prejudiced upon. And if everyone speaks English, then who will be prejudiced upon, right? And one thing I thought was interesting were some statistics I found. I found out that in a study that more proficient English speakers earn up to 40% more than people who are less proficient in English. I thought that was a little bit interesting. And this was actually proposed to me in my breakout room, was that people were afraid that diversity would kind of wane. It wouldn't be as strong anymore if there was an official language. But I don't think that's true at all because some of the most diverse countries are in Africa. And I can, off the top of my head, Zimbabwe and Uganda are some of the most, oh yeah, and also South Africa are in the continent of Africa. And they're some of the most diverse countries, but funny enough, they also have English as official languages. Though, to be fair, it's not their only official language, but it is still an official language. And I thought it was funny enough that within a list I found, I can cite the source. I can put my articles in the chat, of course. That in one of the sources I found that only in the top 20 most diverse countries culturally and ethnically, the only North American country to be ranked in the top 20 most diverse was Canada, not even the USA. So I think typically this is kind of like a straw man argument. It's kind of a non sequitur, if you will, to say that people will stop speaking English people will stop speaking other languages if English is an official language. And to be fair, we could also add more official languages because there is no limit. Zimbabwe has 16. I believe South Africa has 11. So who's to stop us from furthering our own official language arsenal, I suppose? So I can cite all my articles within the chat if you want.
Okay, if you'd like to do that, then you can. Right, so that covered a lot of ground. So first of all, the argument was that if English were to be the official language, it would promote unity. It would potentially lead to less discrimination if everybody's speaking English. It would maybe lead to more job opportunities in a way because proficient English speakers earn up to 40% more. Also, if English were to be made the official language, first of all, there's nothing that could stop us from adding more official languages. There are some countries that have multiple official languages. And even if it were English only, it'd be for federal purposes only. You can't ban people from speaking another language because that would be illegal. And there's some very diverse countries, especially in Africa. A lot of them have official languages. They're linguistically diverse. People speak a lot of different languages in these countries in Africa, but some of them have French or Portuguese or English as their official language. But people still speak their own language. So, yeah, that was a lot. Thank you, Oscar.
If I may say something, historically, is there a connection between English as the official language, as the only language, as a matter of fact, the official language? Because those who promote English as English only legislation also advance the whole notion of English as the official language of the United States. And this singularity is basically disconcerting and troubling. So if we had the willingness, if you will, for recognizing more than one official language, that would be the true spirit of democracy. So my really question is, does that give us ground for concern if English only rule and the official language become intrinsically intertwined historically?
In my research, I believe that the US should not have an official language. And actually in 1780, John Adams proposed that English should be the official language of the United States to the Continental Congress, but they ruled that it was undemocratic and a threat to individual liberty. So I still think that statement holds true today, just because I feel like a lot of people are discriminated against because they don't speak English, but a lot of times people aren't able to learn English. Like, I know, like, my grandparents, it's hard for them to understand English just because they're so much older. So I feel like forcing people to learn a language that they could often struggle with, because English is confusing in many ways, should not happen. Like, I feel like it would just put people in a disadvantage if they were forced to learn English.
Okay, so
I'd like to, oh, sorry.
All right, so now I've gotten a couple of different sides of this economic opportunity. On the one hand, people who learn English or know English, they're likely to learn through studies have shown that they earn 40% more, but then what good does that do for those who don't know English, or those who came here as adults and don't have opportunities to learn English? So that could possibly fuel discrimination. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to go off on what Brianna said. So yes, we were basically founded with the idea of free country, which led to the First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. So I believe that with that concept in mind, well, if you're trying to make an official language for the United States, it can be argued that the First Amendment stops that, and that any official language or forcing federally an official language actually will violate the First Amendment right. And I'd also like to talk about the putting in more official languages so we can help with diversity, as someone was explaining earlier. But my question is that if you want an official language to unify the country, but you're willing to add more official languages to help with others, then what exactly is the need for an official language? If you're going to add so many other languages, is there a need to make them official if we can just freely have languages just exist on their own in the country? Like I've gone to many parts of LA that are so linguistically different. And like in some parts I see Spanish as used like exactly everywhere, like no one speaks English. And then I've gone to other parts where people only speak Korean and don't know any English. So I think our country is so diverse and was brought up by being a free country that any attempt to make an official language would destroy that.
I also want to add on to what Anna said, because how would we pick which languages are the official languages of the United States? Because according to the National Virtue Translation Center, there are around 311 different languages spoken in the United States.
So these are both very good points in and of themselves. So one of the arguments on the pro side is that, well, if English is made the official language, who's to say we can't add more? But then if you're doing that to promote national unity, as was argued, then what would be the point of even having multiple official languages? So that kind of creates a bit of a potential contradiction there. The second point was there are over 300 languages spoken in the US, so how do you pick which ones are official? Are you going to go by the ones that are most spoken, or the ones that have the largest number of speakers, or is there some other measure of importance? So if you want to pick official languages, those are things that you would have to consider if you wanted to have multiple official languages. And there are questions as to whether that would be practical or achievable or not. All right, okay. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
I would also like to add that the U.S. doesn't need an official language because it will create a cultural loss to many immigrants. So according to the Nature of Language book, preservation of the native language or dialect reinforces an ethnic or regional identity. This is a linguistic connection to one's place of origin and to fellow members of the home community or diaspora. Diasporic communities want to preserve their native language by having their children learn it. They want to use language to preserve a cultural heritage as they stay connected to their Americanized children. So this means that being able to use any language one wants allows them to stay connected to who they are and where they come from. And the United States is full of so many immigrants that want to remember where they come from. So using their native language is one way to do that and to pass it on to their culture, to pass on their culture to their children, especially for communities where native languages are becoming extinct. So if they kind of learn an official language, the areas where languages are only speak 2,000, where only like 2,000 people speak the native language, it can be lost throughout generations.
So the argument here is that it could lead potentially to cultural loss or a reduced sense of identity if a national language were to be imposed. Now, we did kind of talk about this on the pro side as well. The argument there is that even if English were the official language, it wouldn't necessarily force people not to speak the language in private settings. So But on the other hand, if English is made the official language, then that might encourage them to try to use English instead of the other language, like especially if they want to go into certain jobs, such as federal government jobs. That might cause them to focus more on using English. So we've seen arguments on both sides of this particular issue as well.
I would like to add that even if having an official language didn't mean that everyone was forced to speak it, I think it'd still be a sort of gateway for more discrimination, because even today, without an official language, there are people who yell at people who are not speaking English, telling them to speak English or speak American, which doesn't make sense. So I think having English established as an official language would bring more discrimination. They'd have like more of a reason as to why people should be speaking English.
Now, this is an important point as well. Even if making English an official language doesn't have any legal effects or requirements, there is also the question about the message that it could send to the citizens of this country. Could it potentially lead people to believe that English is superior and to discriminate against and look down upon those who do not speak English or who speak a different language? Could it lead to a sense of superiority, I guess, for people who speak English over those who don't? And when that occurs, discrimination and harassment and I might even go as far as to say hate crimes can result from that. So I do think that that's an important point. Even though making English an official language is not going to make everyone stop speaking their language, because number one, that's illegal. Number two, that's impractical. There are real world de facto effects that it could have potentially.
Yeah, so this whole issue of discrimination that was brought up is quite relevant. As a matter of fact, I recall reading that a trucker who spoke Spanish, he was actually from California. He had 20 years of experience driving trucks, but he was stopped by a trooper in, I think, Alabama for his failure to speak English. And he was fined $500, even though basically he spoke English, but he had definitely a Spanish accent. He was able to answer the trooper the questions that he was being asked. But he was basically given a $500 ticket. And that probably was the maximum fine for this kind of basically offense. Is that an example of discrimination or not? So definitely, what kind of proficiency would you require a trucker beyond basically his ability to respond to the questions in a meaningful and relevant way? So I would say that is a very clear example of discriminatory practices or language profiling, if you will.
Do we have any other arguments that people would like to make, or should we move on to the judging? We've got about 9 minutes left.
Yes, I have
something that I discussed with my teammates in the breakout room was that, as stated in page 97 of the book, The Nature of Language, promoting a standard national language that dominates the media and public disclosure is a way of regulating, usually discouraging linguistic diversity, how they already had mentioned. The way that a person speaks reflects cultural variety. It defines them as a collective, and one can distinguish them from other speech communities. If the US makes an official language, it will perceive as a threat to national unity because there would be a rejection of linguistic diversity, denying speakers of non-standard varieties to express themselves fully, which goes back to like discrimination.
Kaylee, were you going to say something or not?
Oh no, I'm not. I'm just the audience.
All right. Okay. So that was more of the, even though it wouldn't make it illegal, it could still lead to real world consequences. It could still discourage people from maybe speaking a language other than English.
So Max, do we have a few minutes?
Yes, we have 8 minutes.
So do we have a statement? I wanted to show this video. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you visit the media section of the course, you will find quite interesting, informative, and educational videos. So I thought this one was interesting. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe we could watch a segment of this that is on the same topic if it runs. It's a YouTube video. Just take it to YouTube, it might be easier. Apparently they haven't fixed the problem yet. Do you see my screen?
Located on the border with Mexico,
Yes.
Luis, Arizona is a small town of 25,000 residents, 90% of whom are Hispanic, and where English is not the main language. But San Luis jumped from a small rural town to the national stage when Alejandrina Cabrera, a U.S. citizen by birth, raised in Mexico, was disqualified to run for city council based on her low English proficiency.
And the people ask me, how do you feel? You know, do you need my vote? Is yours?
Cabrera was disqualified after San Luis's mayor filed a legal challenge based on a state law established more than 100 years ago.
There is a law in the books that requires them to be able to read, write, and understand English, and Mrs. Cabrera did not meet those requirements.
Cabrera's case comes as Republican lawmakers are reviving a bill introduced last year that would establish English as the official language of the United States. It would require official functions to be conducted in English, and it would establish speaking it as a requirement for naturalization.
Y eso sería un problema real que podría hacer más difícil la participación de nuestra comunidad latina en el sistema electoral.
In the meantime, Cabrera says lawyers appealed the judge's decision and are waiting for the Arizona Supreme Court to decide her case. She's hoping a decision can be reached before February 7th, the last date to print her name on the ballot.
A lo mejor no es proficiente, pero es lo suficiente para representar mi comunidad, que es San Luis, Arizona.
So this is an interesting argument for English as the national language as well. There is more actually to the videos that would follow, but I thought that was an interesting case as well. So Max, would you like to wrap up the debate for the day?
Okay. And our judge is now here. So
Okay.
Nathan, do you have a verdict, pro or con? Who do you think won this argument? Is he here? Yeah, he's here. Okay. Nathan? All right, I guess he can't hear me.
Nathan, can you hear us? Nathan, are you there? Apparently not.
Okay. All right. Would some from the audience like to volunteer to judge, since we're kind of state of emergency here, so to speak?
I can.
Okay.
So I think when I heard both sides, I can see where each side could be right. Oscar did have very good points that I didn't even like think about because it would seem like, in my opinion, that I would be on the pro side. I mean the con side. And so I think it made me think twice about like the whole thing with Oscar's points. But I think initially I would stick with the side of English like not being the national language of the US, just because like some of the students said, it would create a further it would create more division and less unity, although I can see like how it could. It just, I think that as America, we do have the freedom of speech and the freedom and rights and everything. So I think that I would go with the con side and say that there doesn't need to be any like further, what is it called? Like standardization within America. Yeah.
Excellent point, except that we should really make a distinction in some cases between national languages and official languages. So national languages could be spoken in a certain basically area, more than one, for instance, but official language would be the language of the government. So the two are not the same. That distinction has to be maintained, but I think the way you were using it probably made basically sense, but it's important to see that fine distinction. Nathan? I thought Nathan came in briefly. He is having connection problems.
Must be. I just told him in the chat in case he is here. Maybe it's just an audio thing, but I don't know. Oh, he's gone again. All right. Okay, no, now he's back. Yeah, it must be a connectivity thing. Yeah, he's back now. Oh, now he's gone again. Yeah. Or it seems to be connection problem on his end. I'll just make it.
Could I add this comment to the flip grid at some point? I think this was a very fruitful debate, even though a consensus cannot really be reached on such highly controversial matters, and that's what makes it more interesting. As a matter of fact, I have seen in most elections, this is one of the main topics that always comes to the fore. Now, during the pandemic, I haven't seen it yet in the debates, but it is bound to appear in every presidential election. Max?
So Nathan just emailed me and he said Zoom keeps kicking him out. So yeah, it's just a connectivity issue.
Zooming out.
Yeah.
So would you like to wrap up the meeting?
Sure. All right. So I think there were very good arguments presented on both sides. Thank you, everybody, for presenting your argument. I will, or not I will, but for the Flipgrid and the Nearpod that are posted on Beachboard, please be sure that you upload a video for Flipgrid. I saw the Flipgrid earlier. There were only about 5 entries on there. Yeah, there's still only 5. So please do the Flipgrid. Also, participate in the Nearpod discussion for Claim 7. Besides that, I think you are good to go. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See you soon.
Professor, can I have a quick minute with you after everyone leaves?
Let me stop the recording.